What's up, everyone? Kevin here from Skywatcher, and welcome to another episode of the What's Up Webcast. We do this every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, right here at the Skywatcher USA YouTube channel. We cover everything from what's up in the sky to equipment to helpful tips and tricks. And of course, at the end of the month, we have a special guest to talk about their specialty in the field of astronomy. So, today we are talking about a pretty relevant topic that I think a lot of people should be interested in. Everyone seems to like the gear conversations, and that's, no pun intended, literally what we're talking about today. Gears, harmonic drives, direct drives, all these fancy things that are available to us in the amateur astronomy community now. It's really never been a better time to be an amateur astronomer because the amount of technology and equipment that is now available to us is pretty crazy. But there's been a lot of development in the mount world over the last probably 5 to 10 years. And we need to kind of understand what the difference is, because as you probably see online, there's a lot of trends. People like this, people like that. But what does all of it actually mean in the end of the day when we're out with our telescopes, and what is beneficial and what's not beneficial, and not just something you read from some 35 opinions on a social media site. So we're going to kind of dig into understanding how the mounts of the modern era work, at least as of October 20th, 2023, when this episode aired. And all of our episodes here are recorded, so if you want to go back and watch it at any time, you are welcome to do so. If you like what you see here on the What's Up Webcast, please go ahead and subscribe. Leave a like on the video. Lets us know we're doing a good job. If you have an episode idea for next year, please email us at info@skywatcherusa.com and title it What's Up. To stay up to date with what's going on at Skywatcher through our email blast, head over to www.skywatcherusa.com, and up at the top, find subscribe and save, and then fill it on out, and you'll be on our email list, and you'll be able to find out all kinds of information on what's happening here at Skywatcher. So, let's talk mounts. Now, there's a lot of discussion about mounts. Everyone's got an opinion on it. And this is honestly the most important part of your telescope setup. You can have the best optics in the world, and if you don't have a mount, it doesn't mean anything. Because if that telescope cannot find or stay on target or even be held to use for observation, then there's absolutely no point in having that amazing telescope because your mount sucks. So if you're especially in the field of amateur astrophotography, the mount is the most critical piece of equipment in the entire setup. And over the years of doing this, I've seen a lot of people slack off when it comes to the mount. Of course, we want the sexy telescope that's amazing optics and, whatever the Strel ratio is, whatever floats your boat. But if you don't have a mount that holds it, it's a paperweight. So the first thing I would probably tell you is don't slack on the mount. You want to make sure that you are investing in a very good foundation for your system. And you probably want to buy a mount that's a little bit larger than what you think you are going to need. Especially if you are new to astrophotography, but you're starting to get to the point where I want to make this investment. And I know this is something I want to be a part of, then I would recommend getting a mount a little bit larger than you think you are going to need at this moment. Because if you call me or our team and you're asking, what should I get? We're going to listen to what you're saying, but we're not just listening to what you're saying now. We're also taking into the thought of where you're going to be in a year from now. Because what happens a lot of times is someone will buy whatever mount they can afford at the time, which is completely understandable because budget is important. But one thing you need to think about is if you buy a small mount now, because that is just what you can swing, or you could wait a little bit more and then buy a little bit bigger mount. And the nice thing is that larger mount is going to allow your telescope system to grow as you advance. Because right now, let's say you're starting with a small little 80 millimeter refractor or a little Newtonian, and you've got yourself either a little, CMOS camera or a DSLR. And maybe a year from now, it's like, hey, I want to get an 8-inch Cassegrain or a larger refractor. Well, now you're back to square one, because now you have to sell or get rid of your smaller mount or keep it and then go buy another mount. Or you can just rip the Band-Aid off and get the mount that you know is going to support you in the long run and then add on top of it. So that's how I like to look on it, is rip the Band-Aid off once. Now that doesn't mean you have to go to the entire top tier of, the top shelf of the mount world, but make sure you're investing in something that's going to allow you to grow into your setup. You don't want to outgrow the setup 6 months from now. We want something you'll grow into. So when you get it, it might be like, wow, I spent way too much, or this is too big for me. Give it a few months and you'll probably realize it's not the case. You want to future-proof your investment. You want to make sure that you're thinking down the road and not just what's in front of you. But there's a lot of interesting options on the market nowadays, and that's what we're going to kind of break into, what the difference is. So there's gears. There's gear drive, which has been popular for decades. There's belt drive. Of course, there's strain waves that are out now, which are also known as harmonic, but the true name is strain wave drives. And direct drive is another one. There's some other ones out there like friction drives, which just use little rubber wheels against a smooth surface. That's kind of similar to, it's its own thing, but there's only a couple companies that are doing it. So we're just going to focus on the 4 major ones: gear, belt, strain wave, or harmonic, as you guys know it. But strain wave is the universal term for that kind of drive, and direct drives. And we're going to see what's right for you, because every single one of these designs has a plus and a minus to it, and we'll go into it. So mount types, and I'm talking about the drive types. I'm not talking about, anything more than that. So there are several types of mounts, and I kind of broke them out to you already, but there's gear, belt drive, strain wave drives, and direct drives. And all of these work. Every single one of them has been proven to work by various companies in the market nowadays. And many of you have multiples of these. Some of you probably have a gear-based mount. Some of you have a belt drive mount. A lot of you now are getting strain waves. Some of you might even have direct drive mounts. But in this episode, what we really want to do is, what are the advantages and disadvantages, and what does that mean for us at the end of the day? When we are out under the stars and our equipment is running and you're either viewing or you're taking a picture, what is the advantages and disadvantages of these designs? Because every single one of them has them. So let's talk about the most basic one. This is the gear drives. Gear drives have been used for years, decades. It's kind of the most basic form of a mount at this point. This is the inside of an HEQ5, if you needed to know. So the way this works is the motor, which sits down here, these little gray things for examples, these gray sections, here and here, those are the motors, at least for our mount, those are the motors. And you'll notice they have a little spur gear, right? And every mount's a little bit different, but this is kind of the general consensus of how it works. So the motor's going to have a little a spur gear of some size, and then that is going to mesh with another spur gear. Now in the HEQ5, you have 3 spur gears. You've got the one on the motor, you've got the center, and then you have the worm spur gear, this large spur gear up here that is attached to the worm, and the worm then meshes to the ring gear. And the ring gear is what moves your deck and right ascension axis. So most of these common mounts like the EQ6, the HEQ5, the C-Gem, things like that, Paramounts, Astrophysics, they all have a ring gear and a worm gear on each axis, and that's what's moving everything. Now, all of these mesh with each other, and that's basically what moves it. So here's my little example here. So you can see everything is actually moving. So we have the motor gear. The motor gear meshes with the worm spur gear. I couldn't make this little thing move. So what is everyone? Oh, so yeah, we have the motor gear. We have the worm spur gear, and sometimes, like in our HEQ5, there's another spur that sits between these two. It just depends on the design. The worm spur is attached to the worm gear, and then the worm gear meshes with the main ring gear. Let me see if I can get this to do it again. And it all works just like that. And that's how your mount operates when using all of these things. So that's cool. What does that actually mean for us out in the field? So this is a very effective design. It works fine. It's worked for decades. And it still works today. There are plenty of people who are using HEQ5s and all these designs to use them. Now, the negative portion is every gear that is meshed together is a point where backlash can occur. And backlash is where there is a little bit of chatter between the teeth. Now, they have to be meshed correctly. They can't be too tight and they can't be too loose, because if it's too loose, you're just going to have all this play in your gears, and that's going to show up in your image where there's like a delayed response when you slew it, or chatter, or there's all these things that can actually occur. But if it's too tight, what you're going to do is you're going to jamming everything, and then you're going to probably damage the motor or the motor board or something. This is why a lot of companies don't like when customers go in and adjust the backlash in their mount, because usually the adjustments that the customer is doing is they're adjusting the mesh between the worm gear and the main ring gears. That's a very delicate balance, and usually they're pretty well done from the factory. And a lot of times, if you tighten them too much, it will cause it to jam. And that's very something you need to pay attention to, because this is very temperature specific as well. In the winter, that stuff is going to retract. In the summer, it's going to expand out a little bit. So you need to have a little bit of backlash in a gear-based system, because if you don't, there's no room for the gears to kind of exist and expand and contract as you go through temperature fluctuations. So, and these are very minor fluctuations, but when you're talking about gear mesh, where it's, a very delicate balance, too much or too little is a very small window. So we usually recommend that you don't mess with these things unless you really have paid attention to what you're doing. Now, something like our mount here, the HEQ5, you can adjust it a couple different ways. And I'm not saying you should go do this, but you have the motor here. The motors in an HEQ5 can slide up and down to adjust the gear mesh between the central spur and the motor spur. And then there's a whole nother section where you can actually adjust the mesh between the central spur and the worm spur. So there's 2 points of adjustment right there, because there are 2 areas that are being meshed together. And then on top of that, you also have the main gears, the worm and the ring. So all of those have to work together to make sure it's all working and jiving correctly. Are the Meade LX200 GPS models using gears in their... Yes. I think there's spring-loaded gears. I'm not sure because I haven't torn one apart in a long time, but they are gear-based. There's not any fork-mounted mount that I am aware of from the major manufacturers that isn't, if you're using a fork-mounted Schmidt Cassegrain, it's gears. Now, there are ways to kind of adjust the backlash in some of these mounts, like on our CQ350s or some other mounts. You'll see that spring-loaded worm The nice thing about a spring-loaded worm assembly is the spring is always meshed in to the best of its abilities to the main ring gear. So it reduces the amount of backlash you have to deal with in a spring-loaded system in the worm and the main gears on the mount. So a spring-loaded worm is very helpful. The CQ350 has them. But you want to make sure they're not too light, not too tight, and not too loose, because you don't want to put backlash into it, but you also don't want to jam the mount either. I have worked with a lot of people in customer support who adjust their mounts until they're like, there's no more play. Well, there needs to be a little bit of play, or else the mount's not going to work. So do not adjust your mount gears and just say, oh, there's no more backlash, so it's good. No, it's not. There needs to be a tiny fraction of movement in there. And of course, if you have a long telescope and you're moving it like on the back of the tube, you have so much moment arm that you're going to feel it a lot more. But there does need to be a fraction of movement inside of these mounts so they're not jamming. Do not adjust these to where it's like, it doesn't move. It's not that way. If it's spring loaded, it's a slightly different setup. Now, a way to get around that, to reducing the amount of backlash that can happen inside the mount, not just on the worm and the ring, but to get around that, you can use belt drives. Now, belt drives are nice because they remove a lot of the spur gears, if not all the spur gears from the system. There is no more gear mesh inside the mount other than the worm and the ring gear. The two main gears doing the work are the only point of adjustment there. And that is different depending on the company that you're working with. For example, the CQ350 that we sell is a spring-loaded worm assembly with a belt drive. So we've tried to eliminate the periodic error, or not the backlash issue in that mount. But there's other mounts that do the same thing, like the Paramounts from Software Bisque, the Mighty, the MX, the ME2. Those are belt drive worm assemblies, and they're spring-loaded systems as well. I actually think the belt and spring-loaded worms are probably the best way to kind of get around things. It's very simplistic. So belt drives, and there's a few different mounts on the market that cover this, but I'm just going to talk about the Skywatcher variations because that's what I know the best. But for the EQ6R, so this particular thing right here, for belt drive, if we're just talking Skywatcher mounts, covers the AZ-EQ5, the AZ-EQ6, and the EQ6R, EQ8R, and EQ8RH are all covered for the Skywatcher lineup in the belt drive arena that we're talking about right now. CQ350 is belt drive, so it has the pulleys that we're about to talk about, plus spring-loaded worms. I know there's a question. I'll get to it in just a second. So on this particular system, the motor has a pulley attached to its center axis. And then there is a belt that is run around that pulley, and the belt runs up to a larger pulley that's attached to the worm gear, and that's how that all works. So when the motor moves, it moves its pulley, and then the belt moves along with it, and then it works something like this. So I couldn't make the belt actually move here, but so you can see the motor pulley is moving. It'll move the belt around the worm pulley. That causes the worm to spin, and then that causes the main ring gear to spin and move the axis of the mount. So that is how a belt drive works. As you can see here, the only thing in here that is actually meshed together is the worm and the ring gear. The belt does have teeth on it, so it engages the pulleys, but the only thing that's going on with the belt and the pulleys is there's tension adjusted. So on an EQ6R or anything that's using belt drive from Skywatcher, the motor sits on a set of pivot screws. Those are channels. and then you can pull those apart, increasing the tension of the belt on there. And that's probably pretty true for any belt drive system, is there has to be one of those pulleys that's adjustable to increase or decrease tension of the belt, because the belt has to be taut in order for it to engage, because if the belt is too loose, you're going to get sag in the belt, and that's going to introduce some kind of backlash into your system, because it takes more for that belt to tighten up to move. Now, if you're messing around inside one of these mounts, that doesn't mean make the belt extremely tight, because if it's too tight, you might cause damage to the motor and the motor axis and the pulleys. It just has to have enough tension to keep it somewhat taut so it doesn't bend when it starts to engage from the pulleys there. Let's see, there's a question here. Does the gear get worn out over years and then we get more backlash? Most mounts are pretty well built, and you're not slewing it enough to really wear down the gears. I suppose it could happen. I do know of companies that are doing constant observation of the sky that have moved to different mounts that don't have gears, because they actually have worn the gears down, but they are using their telescopes like 24/7, constantly observing like satellites, and they're slewing them all over the place a lot. So these are like survey telescopes and stuff like that. For anybody in the amateur field, you're probably not going to wear that gear down anytime soon. A lot of these gears are made up of brass or stainless steel or something like that. They're usually really quality machined pieces. So I wouldn't worry that you're going to wear your gear down anytime soon. Now, this is also an effective way of doing things. The reason I like the belts is the belts are pretty simplistic. It's a good way of not using anything exotic, but still reducing the amount of backlash. What design does the GTI use? The Star Adventure GTI is a gear-based system with a spring-loaded set of worms. That is how the Star Adventure GTI works. I would have loved the Star Adventure to be belt-driven. There's not a lot of room in there to stick the belts in there, so... but belt drives are very nice. The nice thing about a belt drive is it does remove the spur gears, so it reduces the amount of backlash that can happen inside the mount. And the belts are much easier to adjust if you have to do it. On these, you really shouldn't have to be messing around with your belt tensions. These belts are also not just rubber. Most belts have Kevlar woven into them. They're like a timing belt in a car. So the belts are pretty sturdy and usually last years. If you need them, they can always be obtained. But yeah, so you should be good there. Like I said, this also reduces the amount of moving parts. So by using the two pulleys, we've been able to pull out a lot of the ring gears. That means less bearing, or ring gears, spur gears. We've been able to remove the spur gears. That reduces the amount of bearings that have to be used in there. That reduces the amount of the machining that has to be done, because now we don't need to have brass gears. We can just use aluminum pulleys. And they don't have to really be, as precise as they have to be for a gear, because the belt is going to be able to just dig into the teeth of the pulleys, and you're all set. So the other thing I like about these mounts, particularly like the EQ6R, is there is only one place in the mount that the backlash can actually occur. That is between the ring gear and the worm gear. The main gears, there's only one section where those are meshed together on each axis. So if you're adjusting for backlash on an EQ6R or an AZ EQ6 or an AZ EQ5, there's only one spot that's coming from, and that's actually on the main gears. So yeah. Anyone else had issues with the GTI gears stripping? There's no way you could strip a gear on these mounts. What people do have, particularly on the Star Adventure that you're asking about, if there's a way you can strip a gear, you can't strip a gear in these mounts. If you do, you're the Incredible Hulk and you just sheared metal teeth off of a gear. What generally happens is the tensioners that adjust the actual spring tension, those screws are generally very small, and that can get stripped. Or particularly for the AZ or the Star Adventure GTI, if you're not tightening I have a lot of people who tend to over tighten the right ascension clutch. That knob has very fine threads that I've had people strip out because the threads are very fine, but the gears themselves are all metal. So there's no way that you would damage a gear unless you literally went in there and damaged the gear. So usually it's something else. It's not that the gear is stripped. It's that the clutch in there, the tensioner has been damaged in some way, and that needs to be taken care of. So that's what's going on there. Is there a way to adjust backlash in the deck axis of a CQ350? You want to talk to our repair team. They spend way more time working inside the mounts now than I do. So you'd want to talk to them on the adjustments that are done. The CQ350s are generally pretty tight when the clutches are locked down because they are spring-loaded worms. So, okay, let's see. Okay, here's the one that everyone is freaking out about now. The strain waves, also known as harmonics. For clarity, harmonic drive is the name that a company has put on that, kind of like Kleenex. The real name for these kinds of drives are strain waves. That is the universal topic, or the universal name for these. Now, strain wave has exploded over the last couple years because of ZWO's AM3 and AM5s, but they are not the first at all to be in the strain wave arena. Rainbow Astro, which you see here, this is the RST 135 a friend of mine has. Those have been around for a while. And then you have Crux. Crux is another company that was making actually very large strain wave mounts. I don't even know if they're still around at this point. They might be. I've not messed with them or worked with them at all. But Crux was making incredibly large strain wave mounts, like for 16-inch tubes. But anyway, a strain wave system is very intriguing. It's something that a lot of people are hopping on now. Now, the strain wave system is unique, and it's generally used in like the automotive industry or factory assemblies lines where they have arms moving around. So the way it works is you have a motor. The motor attaches to a generator, and that spins an internal portion called a wave generator. And the wave generator sits inside of what's called a flex spline gear, which is this flexible gear. And that pushes against the ring gear. And the ring gear, rather than like a mount like ours, where the teeth are on the outside of the gear, their ring gears, the teeth are on the inside of the ring gear. And it looks something like this. So here's the wave generator. This is the flex spline gear. And then all of this sits inside of in the middle of what's known as the ring gear, or a rigid wheel is what they've got here. Just please don't copy the auto and trade. Replace some gears with plastic. Okay. Yeah, we're trying to get away from plastic gears or nylon or any of that. So this is the way a strain wave actually works. So in the middle, the green, that is a wave generator. The red is the flex spline. You can see how that's actually flexing as the wave generator inside is actually, it's literally warping the gear is how that's actually working. And then all that sits inside of the main ring gear. Now this came from Wikipedia, so thanks to them for having a very great animation to showing how this works. And the cool thing about the strain wave mounts is you can see that there's always two sets of teeth engaged at all times. So that's kind of a nice thing to have. Is there a Skywatcher strain wave mount coming out soon? I have NDAs. I can't talk about anything under development, if it were. So right now I have nothing to show or tell you about. So, but this is a strain wave gear drive. So it's a pretty interesting system. Some notes about this. There's no need for balancing, unlike a typical equatorial mount. The way a strain wave system works is it can work off balance, which a lot of people like. Because we're not having to deal with these bigger gearboxes and we're not having to use, spur gears that ratchet up to the worms, and there's actually no worm assembly in there, you can shrink these little things down quite a bit, and they have a lot of torque, so they can move these really well. And because they have those two sets of teeth, there's no backlash on these things. When you turn them on, they lock on. They don't move. There's no backlash inside of these. One thing that you need to pay attention to is, because these systems are not balanced, it means the whole system is not balanced. So a lot of these little mounts, like the Harmonic and the strain waves from various companies, you need to be careful and aware of how your setup is situated, and that the tripod that this is attached to has a wide enough spread to keep it from falling over. Now, you can put counterweights on these, and the thing that actually makes me laugh a lot of times is people are like, it doesn't need counterweights, but I do need to put a weight underneath the tripod. So it does need weights. You just move the weights from a shaft on the side of the mount to underneath the tripod to keep it from falling over. Now, I am a fan of the strain wave mounts. They are really neat. If you really have no idea what you're talking about with them, here's the gist of how a strain wave is. In photography, there's aluminum tripods and carbon fiber tripods. Both of them do the exact same thing, and they do it very well. However, if you are in need of a light, compact, ready-to-go system, carbon fiber is generally easier, especially if you're having to lug it long distances or you need something that is lighter weight. It's going to cost you more, but it still does the same thing as a standard tripod will do. That's exactly the same way that a strain wave mount is. There's nothing special about a strain wave mount. However, the advantages of it are they tend to be small, they still have high payload capacities, and they're great if you need basically ultimate portability is what the strain waves are great for. Other than that, I've used them. They're really nothing special. They don't offer anything that a standard equatorial can't do, but they are lighter weight, and it makes it a heck of a lot easier to get outside in the backyard or travel with these because they don't use a counterweight. They are small and they still hold a ton of weight. So those are the advantage of it. If you need something that handles a good chunk of weight and it's compact, consider a strain wave mount. That is their advantages. Now, one of the issues of a strain wave mount is these things have very large, very complex periodic error. They have a lot of periodic error. So you absolutely have to auto guide these mounts, which is really funny because 5 years ago, everyone wanted to not auto guide. Now you have to auto guide. A strain wave mount requires it that you auto guide, or else you're going to get some really funky stars. So, and usually with a strain wave mount, you have to guide in short exposures because it is changing quite a bit. So you can't be doing long guide exposures, or else you're going to get some really screwed up guide charts. So 1 second is probably what you're going to have to do there. Now, another thing about a strain wave mount, because this is going to start coming up. I mean, there are small ones out there like the AM3. There's the middle of the road like the AM5. Maybe there's a bigger one coming out. I wouldn't be surprised if they were working on a bigger one. Rainbow Astro has the RST 135. They also have the RST 135E. The E has the on-axis encoder, which helps with periodic error. Those are really expensive encoders. To get rid of periodic error or help reduce it, you can put on-axis encoders on these mounts, whether it's a strain wave or a regular equatorial, like we do it on our EQ8RH. Ioptron has them, where we put on-axis encoders rather than the encoder being on the stepper motor or the worm. We put it on the axis of the mount so the encoder knows exactly where it is. And this reduces periodic error quite a bit. Like an EQ8RH guides around 0.3 RMS out of the box, not trained. Your seeing conditions will never be that good. So that's how you can guide with large systems and stuff like that. Now, strain waves, their negatives are, again, they have very large complex periodic error, so you need to auto guide, period. The other thing is they do not scale up well. You can build large harmonic mounts. Large strain wave mounts can be built to where they can hold any tube that you want. However, you need to remember, why are you buying it? Because it's lightweight and it's compact. A larger strain wave mount, lightweight and compact. However, if you are going to be mounting a large tube, let's just say ZWO were to come out with something like an AM8 for argument standards, and you could put a C14 on it. That's a lot of weight and a lot of money that is sitting on a system that's not balanced. So you are going to have one heck of a heavy tripod or a set of weights to hold down that system to keep it from falling over. So the reason why I say harmonic or strain waves do not scale well is because as you get bigger, it kind of goes against what the point of a strain wave mount is. They're made to be travel friendly and lightweight. You can put big telescopes on them, but then you have to use massively heavy tripods to keep them from falling over. So if they made an AM8, maybe it weighs 20 pounds and it holds 80. That'd be cool. But now you need to put it on a pier or a tripod that probably weighs 80 pounds as a counterweight to keep your system from falling over, which goes against the fact that, oh, I don't need counterweights. So that would be the one negative. That'd be one of the big physical negatives of a strain wave system, is they don't scale up well because they're not balanced. So yeah. Anyway, these are travel mounts, and if you want bigger ones, it really offers you no advantage. If you're putting these in an observatory, you could just go get a regular equatorial mount and call it a day, and it would probably auto guide a lot better. So, or even, for example, an RST-135E, which is the encoder version of here, costs almost as much as a basic Paramount Mighty. I can do 5-minute unguided exposures on a Paramount Mighty at 1,000 millimeters. I couldn't even touch that with an RST-135E unguided. It would have to have a guider on there. So I think a lot of people are hopping on the strain wave line because they're cool. They've got cool technology, and there is definitely a place in the market for them, but I do not think they are the end-all, be-all technology that people make them out to be. They definitely deserve to be here. I'm a big fan of the strain waves. Just understand what they're made to do. So, okay. At the end of this, you have direct drive, and there is not many affordable direct drive options in the market nowadays. And direct drives are really what everyone really wants, but they're really difficult to make and they're expensive. And so here's why. A direct drive, the motor drives the mount directly. These have no gears inside of them at all. So there's no periodic error and there's no backlash because there's no gear. However, what makes these things extraordinarily accurate and expensive are the high resolution optical encoders that these things have to use. So the way these things work is you actually have a set of magnets that keep the axis in place and help move it. And then basically what it does is it floats on a magnetic field, and then the motor spins it. So this is inside of a plane wave mount. Thanks to Plane Wave for having it on their website. We gave them credit. This is the inside of one of the Plane Wave L mounts. I don't know which model, but you can see all the magnets in there. And then the center silver ring is one of the encoder rings. Some of the encoders that are used on here cost thousands of dollars by themselves. So by the time you install that and you build them out and all that fun stuff, it racks the price up very quickly. Now, we can get away with that on like the RH for the EQ8 because we only use one high resolution encoder on the right ascension because that's the axis that's doing all the work. However, direct drives need it on both axes. So now you're starting to use some pretty sophisticated equipment. So this is the way a direct drive works. This is my crude model. You have the magnet ring. You have the center motor shaft, which is the only moving part inside of there. And then you have the high resolution encoder. So as the center motor shaft moves, that's the only moving part there. All that rides on a magnetic field, and then the high-res encoder reads out exactly where the position of the mount is. And the fact that there are no gears means there's no movement in the mount anywhere else. Now, some notes about this. Direct drives require them to be perfectly balanced. There isn't this, we'll just offset it to the west or just offset it to the right or the east, and he gets rid of backlash. There is no backlash. So you have to make sure these mounts are perfectly balanced because there is no gear or reduction or step up gears there to eat up that offset weight. Everything relies on the motor. So a direct drive requires you to be absolutely perfectly balanced. However, the advantage is there's no backlash and there's no periodic error. These things are dead accurate, extremely accurate. And for the plane waves, because you have the motor and you've got a ton of torque, these things throw the telescope around 50 degrees per second, which means if you're doing satellite tracking or asteroid detection or something like that, you can move these things fast, and they are very, very quiet. If you've ever been to a show and you've seen the plane wave systems run or other direct drives, they can move that, even a big telescope, they can move those telescopes quick. So that's something to think about. Now, another cool thing that I like about these is if you push on them or the wind pushes on them, the motor knows to push more torque and it will push it more. So you can actually fight against the elements, particularly the wind, when you have a direct drive, because it uses the magnets to actually keep it in that position. It knows where it needs to be. And if you push on a direct drive mount and let go, it springs right back to where it should be in position. And that's A, because the magnets, and B, because the encoder knows exactly where it is in the sky. Absolute encoders are an amazing piece of technology because they know every detail about where that mount should be and where it is. So that's something that the direct drives are fantastic for, but they are the ultimate mount. But man, are they expensive at the moment. I know Plane Wave, the L350, which is their smallest one, they start at about $10,000 and go up. They're not really great for field portability, but most Plane Wave stuff is designed to be in an observatory. But there's not very many portable direct drives anymore. ASA used to make them, the DDM series, and they've kind of gone more prosumer as well. And these are expensive. So anyway, that is the difference between all these drives. If you like what you see here, please go ahead and subscribe. Leave a like on a video. I know there's a bunch of questions in here, so I will try my best to get to them. Let me kind of go back through here. We did that one. Let's see. In the long run, let's say 20 years or so, maybe more, which of these mount types will outlive the others, assuming they are all built to the highest standards? Direct drive is probably what I would recommend. I know of satellite tracking companies that used gear-based mounts, and because of how much they actually slewed them around, they destroyed the gears. So to answer that, I would say direct drive, because direct drives have no moving parts. There's nothing inside of them that moves other than the motor. So for longevity, direct drive is probably what I would recommend for long periods of time, because there's nothing that would wear out. Maybe a board wears out. Maybe the motor wears out. The motor would be the one thing you'd have to replace. There's no gear. Can we spend a minute talking about friction drive also? So friction drives, I don't know the company that makes them. They're in Europe somewhere. I'm sorry. I don't know. A friction drive is usually a mount that has a right ascension and deck, just like a regular equatorial. But rather than there being a gear per se, it's a round, smooth, toothless surface. And the way they actually work is there's a wheel that rolls along this surface, causing friction, and it basically rolls around this, toothless gear, for lack of a better term. That's how a friction drive works. The nice thing about those, there's no backlash because there's no teeth. So, but those, I only know of one company that actually makes a friction drive. There's probably other ones out there. They seem to work, but I don't have any experience with them, and there's not a lot out there with them because there's just not many companies producing it. But it is an interesting design, though. And as long as it works, then great. Let's see. There are other mounts like the Mezzu and the Tridents. The Mezzu mounts, I believe, are belt drive single arm forks. A friend of ours has one, but I haven't played. I've heard good things about it. There's variations of mounts out there. So, let's see. Is there a recommendation on kits to make a CG4 into a go-to? I don't know. You'd probably want to talk to Celestron about that. I'm sure there's something out there that someone's done it, but I don't know off the top of my head for it. So, yeah, there you go. So, Tolga Erickson in the chat was giving you some ideas for to make the CG4 or EQ4 go to. It's a pretty simple kit. Usually there's a motor board, some motors, obviously. The motors are generally stepper motors. Skywatcher uses stepper motors because we don't have to use encoders, because the stepper motor not only moves them out, but it counts the ticks. What about these micro gems like the iXOS 100? I'm not sure what usually a lot of these really, really small equatorial mounts, they're gear drives. They're just basic gear drives. There's nothing super fancy going on. It's a motor, some spur gears, and a worm, and that's it. It's a pretty basic setup. And you know what? The gear systems, there's nothing wrong with them. I have plenty of people who are using EQM35 and HEQ5s and producing amazing images. But obviously, as the years go by, new technology comes out that addresses various things, and it works. It works. Basically, we're just trying to point and keep our optics at some general place in the sky for an extended period of time, and there's a couple ways to go about that. So a gear-based system is an old school system, but it works, and if it's done correctly, it'll work for a long time and be perfectly fine. Belt drives help reduce backlash because they remove most of the spur gears and only use the main ring and worm gear, and that's where the backlash really exists. And you can kind of get away with that with either using encoders, which is a very expensive way to go about it, or spring-loaded worms can help reduce the backlash. Harmonic or strain wave mounts, no backlash, incredibly complex periodic error, however, and they do not scale well to still maintain portability and lightweight and convenience, but they don't scale well. So that's their advantages and disadvantages. Direct drives, no backlash, no periodic error, incredibly reliable over long periods of time, but very expensive because they require very good encoders. And they're just a technology thing. So right now, maybe one day someone will come out with a affordable direct drive. That's going to be kind of the ultimate mount at that point, in my opinion. But right now, you're looking at around $10K for one of those. All right, if you like what you see here, please go ahead and subscribe, leave a like. Let us know we're doing a good job. You can email us at info@skywatcherusa.com if you have an idea for next year. Title that What's Up. If you can go on our YouTube, just subscribe and leave a like on a video. It lets us know we're doing a good job. And then, of course, we still have Totem. A couple more weeks left in that. And next week's episode, I think, is going to be really cool. So we have Alyssa Pagan and Joseph De Pasquale joining us from the Space Telescope Science Institute. These two are the reason you get to see James Webb and Hubble Space Telescope images. They process the data of these space telescopes. So if you're into astrophotography and processing data, we get to sit down with the people who get to process some of the most critical data available to humanity at this point next week. It'll be very interesting to sit down and talk with them. Let's see. Would it be correct to understand that gear drive mount is probably the best for its value and perhaps durability compared to the other types? Yeah, I would probably agree with that. You know, the harmonic or the strain wave mounts are really great if you need something that's portable and lightweight. Awesome. If you're on a budget, hopefully, you know, a basic belt drive like an EQ6R or something like that works perfectly fine. Don't feel like because you don't have a direct drive or you don't have this or that you can't go out and do astrophotography. You can, like an AVX or an EQ6R or any mount that tracks the sky works perfectly fine. Everything on the market is pretty much acceptable for astrophotography purposes. And you have to remember that in your backyard, or most of the places that we do imaging from in the modern day, the seeing isn't that great. You're talking 1 to 2 arc seconds per pixel resolution, and probably closer to 2 for most of us. So all the mounts on the market for the most part will guide around 1 arc second or better. And at that point, you can't even resolve the error in the mount guiding at that point, because the auto guider will take care of it. So we spend a lot of time worrying about what the guide graph looks like and not enough about just what the stars look like. So I wouldn't worry too much about not having this mount or this mount. Just get what's going to work for you. But this is just to show kind of what the pluses and minuses of each design are, and they're all there. You just have to work with what's going to fit your lifestyle and your budget. I would recommend buying a little bit larger mount than you currently need if you're new, because you want to make sure you've got room to grow into the mount and expand your system over time rather than having to go out and buy a new mount in the future. Let's see. Skywatcher's coming out with a harmonic. I never said anything. You're implying. Let's see. I like the go-to's, been on board. Okay, cool. Well, that's everything I have to say about today. I hope that's been helpful. Please note, we are about to go into November, and the time change starts in November 5th, at least for everyone else. I live in Arizona. We don't pay attention to the time change, so that's all on you to change your clocks. But please be aware that starting next month, the time for the webcast is still 10 a.m. Pacific, but the time change is going to affect it. So please be aware that starting next month, the time change is going to come into play again. So the episodes will be shifted an hour for most of us. So please be advised. All right, so that's it for this week. If you like what you see here, please go ahead and subscribe, leave a like on a video. Join us next week. It's going to be an awesome episode. I'm actually really quite curious to see what these two have to talk about. It should be kind of cool. Other than that, please have a great weekend out there. Go look at the moon. Saturn's looking great. If you have any questions about Skywatcher product, please email us at support@skywatcherusa.com. And other than that, that's pretty much it. Have a great weekend, clear skies, and we'll see you guys next Friday. Take care. Bye.